See, I followed this rule for a very long time, which I actually found was a Socratic rule. I didn't know this until really quite recently, until I wrote 12 Rules for Life. Socrates said that he had a daemon, and by which he meant an internal voice. And he said that he always listened to it. And then that was what made him different from other people, that he always listened to this voice. And the voice didn't tell him what to do. It told him what not to do. And when the Delphic Oracle proclaimed that Socrates was the wisest man in Greece, in Athens and in Greece, one of the reasons Socrates attributed her decision to deem him the wisest man was because, well, she said he knew nothing, but he knew in part that he knew nothing, at least in part because he was always listening to the voice of his daemon, his internal conscience. And then I just found out the other day that the word democracy comes from the same root, which is really interesting. Like, I had no idea that that was the case, because what it suggests, it's so fascinating looking at how words are related to one another historically, because you find strange connections between ideas that you would never imagine, and sometimes they're unbelievably profound. And so the basic, what happened historically is that, well, so there was the concept of the Socratic Daemon. Now, it was the daemon that Socrates listened to when he decided that he was not going to run when the Athenians decided that they were going to put him to death. The Athenian aristocrats, right? Because they thought that he was corrupting the youth by, talking to them and telling them the truth. And I suppose that's certainly grounds for chasing someone out of your town. Anyways, they gave him plenty of notice because they didn't really want to kill him. They just wanted to get the old goat the hell out to some other city where he could cause trouble there. And his friends were, making plans to scurry him away from Athens. And he went out and consulted his daemon, and it told him not to leave. And that was a big shock to Socrates because, of course, he didn't want to die. And but yet he had decided that he was always going to follow the dictates of the daemon. And so he did something that only a philosopher would do, was reversed his assumptions. He thought, oh, well, I was afraid of dying, and my daemon said, stick around, and so I must be wrong. It must be worse to risk not following that internal voice than to risk this form of death, which is a question you have to really wrestle with, and one his friends weren't very happy about. But in any case, he didn't run, and we have two good court-like documents attesting to that, one written by someone named Xenophon and the other by Plato. They're very interesting documents. I would highly recommend reading them. They're very short, and one of the reasons I would recommend reading them, apart from the fact that they're fascinating and short, is that you also get the sense from what Socrates wrote that because he had lived his life fully, no holds barred in some sense, that he could let it go when the time came. And that's an interesting thing, because, well, it's a question I think that we all wrestle with. We should, is like, well, is there a purpose to our life? And, well, that's a hard question. And then if there is a purpose, well, how is it expressed? And then if there is a purpose and our lives are truncated, as they are by death, then how can that purpose have significance? And those are hard questions. But Socrates' experience seemed to be that he had lived enough in his life so that when push came to shove, which it certainly did, he was able to gracefully let it go. And he attested to that with his death. And that's fairly convincing, that's a fairly convincing argument. And it's one that I find, well, it's hard to tell if I find it exactly credible, but I don't find it incredible. I mean, I certainly have noticed that as I've got older and have done things, what would you say, accomplished isn't exactly the right word. I've participated in many things that I'm pleased to have participated in them, but wouldn't necessarily go back and participate in them again. It's sort of as if when you do something and you finish it, it's as if it's done. You don't have to do it again. And maybe it's possible, who knows, that if you finish your life, whatever that might mean, if you exhaust your life, then that's enough life, you know, that you've had enough. And I mean, that doesn't mean that I try not to keep myself healthy and that I want to die tomorrow. It doesn't mean any of that. I'm trying to stick around as long as I can, but there's still that curiosity about the relationship between life and mortality, and the possibility that a life well lived exhausts itself in some fundamental sense, so that you can be satisfied, let's say, with what you were.